I think it's interesting because TCU switched from a 4-2-5 to a 3-3-5, bringing in Joe Gillespie as defensive coordinator from Tulsa. Some of that is adjustment and the personnel just getting used to the new style of defense. Some of that is that I think Gillespie is a really great in-game adjuster. So if you look at Oklahoma State and Kansas State, TCU was down by 17, down by 18 in those two games. Kansas State put up 28 points in the first 20-something minutes, but didn't score past the 8-minute mark in the second quarter. So the defense has some flaws. The linebackers cannot cover the pass. The pass rush is pretty much non-existent, but the back five is exceptional in covering the pass. And Mark Perry, who's a transfer from Colorado, has been great in run support. It certainly is the weaker side of the ball, but I think there's enough strengths and enough smarts on the coaching staff to adjust mid-game and sort of, plug the holes as they're occurring.
That's interesting. It feels like you're reading right off of our script, and we didn't even, send it to you beforehand.
Yeah,
but we actually had Mark Perry up next.
Yeah,
he's your leading tackler. And I was surprised to see that you had a safety as your leading tackler, because most of the time, you're expecting to see a middle linebacker or something along those lines. But it seems like they move him around a lot. I've noticed that he lines up in the box, at the nickel, occasionally at the safety as well. But do you feel like his tackles are more of a product of the lack of playmakers in the front seven, or do you think he's just kind of that guy?
Well, I think it's kind of a combo of both. And I think also in that 3-3-5, you'll have sort of the two coverage safeties who for TCU was normally Miller Bradford, and then a combination of Nnamdi Obiazor and Josh Foster, who kind of played that sort of, if you want to run cover two, whatever you call it. I'm not a scheme guy, but they're more on the back end. Mark Perry kind of plays more of that nickel safety where he's up front and kind of providing that little bit of extra run support. Instead of a 6-man box, you might have a 6.5 where Perry is coming down from the top. So he's been great, both in terms of serving as a deep level spy for a quarterback and also kind of fleshing out those outside runs options. Against Kansas, he was outstanding in that offense that Leipold runs, where there's those really stretch options and someone has to come down and cover both the quarterback and the running back. And Perry was great in that. So he's a great run support guy. Thank God TCU doesn't rely on him in the passing game because that's not a strong suit, but he's by design, he is there for run support. So it does make sense that he's the leading tackler. It's just a different scheme than what TCU's been used to, where the two linebackers would kind of fill that spill and kill role. Now Mark Perry's doing that from safety.
Yeah, and I know WVU ran a 3-3-5 for such a long time, and it reminds me of some guys like, your Tyler, you'll remember Eric Wicks, Mike Lorello, guys like that who really kind of played in that safety role, really was disruptive in the backfield, and really, really huge weapon, especially against teams who want to run the spread on the outside. So it's going to be interesting to see how he performs against WVU, because right now our running backs are pretty banged up. So I'm hoping we still stick with the run, but last week against Texas Tech, we were down to one healthy running back that we had, and man, he was exhausted.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys listened to Neil Brown's press conference, but he announced Tony Mathis is out. CJ Donaldson's getting the start, and we're still not sure if Justin Johnson's playing or not. So we might even see some Jalen Anderson for, other than the FCS school we played, pretty much, his first real reps this year. So it'll be interesting. But it's funny you talk about how Perry's getting all these tackles. I was actually listening right before we hopped on here, your co-host Parker on Coos's podcast, and he was talking about how that's pretty much by design. They have those linebackers and linemen trying to fill gaps, and then Perry just basically comes up behind them and cleans it up. So it makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like it's working to perfection if he's already got that many tackles.
Yeah, TCU's run defense has been surprisingly good this year. It's certainly not the best in the nation. If you look at, again, CFB graphs and Parker's nerd stats, they completely disprove me. But it's the better half of the defense. They're 58th in the nation in EPA per play on defense, and they're 78th in EPA per pass on defense. So it's the better aspect of the defense for sure. Again, I think a lot of that is due to the linebackers' inability to cover the pass. But run defense wise, I think TCU held Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State to under 100 yards, which was his lowest output of the season. Deuce is a monster for being 5'6" or whatever he is. And they held that really well. Running quarterbacks are always a weakness. But other than that, TCU's run defense has been pretty stout.
Yeah.
Now, do you
Brandon.
like the switch from the 4-2-5 to the 3-3-5? I know WVU kind of runs a little bit of a hybrid scheme, so I'm just interested to get your perspective on the 3-3-5.
I like it because of the personnel that TCU has this year. TCU's defensive linemen have been sort of a weak point over the last couple of years. There hasn't really been a pass rush. There's been a lot of hits and misses in recruiting. So I think the switch has said, hey, we have a lot of really talented guys on the back end. We have a good linebacker transfer in Johnny Hodges from Navy. D. Winters is solid. Jamoy Hodge is coming on. Let's just remove one of our weak spots and then just add another guy to a linebacker core that is talented at the first line. Once you get into the depth chart, it gets a little weak, but the first three are really good. So let's just focus on them more. I really like the switch. It's certainly something new, but it's worked for TCU this year.
Yeah. So that's your run defense. Let's talk about your passing defense a little bit. Do you have an elite pass rusher? Is there anyone WVU should really keep an eye on anytime it's 3rd and long?
No, is my answer. Dominic Williams, who's a true freshman, is great at nose tackle, and he can kind of muck up some plays. On the edge, there isn't really anyone that's been outstanding. Dylan Horton is probably the best pass rusher, and that's, if you'll pardon a curse, that is damning with faint praise. There's been a couple of guys. Johnny Hodges on blitzes has been effective, but there's not really a guy that has stood out in the pass rush. No.
Yeah, the one guy that I noticed that led the team in sacks was Winters, but I was surprised to see, I think he had 6 sacks, but only I want to say it was 15 total pressures on the season, which that conversion rate is outrageous.
It's outrageous, but they need him in the passing game to kind of cover those running backs, because I'll just get into it now, and I don't want to, again, preempt any of your questions, but Jamoy Hodge and Johnny Hodges, first off, confusing to say their names back to back. Second off, they are not good in pass defense. The best pass coverage linebacker. So they kind of need him sitting back there to cover running backs, tight end, slot receivers, because otherwise it's going to be a nightmare. Kansas did a great job of manipulating TCU's linebackers. Kansas State did the same. So that's kind of the weak spot. And that's why Winters isn't racking up more sacks and more pass rushes, is because he's needed to kind of play that role in pass coverage.
Yeah, so, I mean, it sounds like TCU doesn't want to, send a lot of guys, which is good for us, because when our offense gets rolling, they can put up points. But the way teams have slowed down our passing game is they basically just press our outside wide receivers who can't get separation, and they send heavy pressure. Do you think your defense or secondary is built to do that? You said you like your linebackers to drop back, but the blueprint's pretty much out on how to slow us down. Do you think you have enough talent to go with that strategy?
Yeah, especially in the back five. I think if you look at Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, who is an outstanding cover corner. You look at guys like Bud Clark, who I've been on Bud Clark Island for years. He can kind of play a hybrid corner safety role. He's outstanding. He's had a couple really key picks in the last few games. And then you go to the safeties. Obviously, Mark Perry is great in run defense, but Miller Bradford, the artist formerly known as Nook Bradford, he changed his name going into this year, has been great. Josh Foster's really come on. There are a couple weak spots. I'm not crazy about Josh Newton at cornerback. Noah Daniels has been hurt. I really like him. I wish you could see the field more. But like I said, Travius Hodges-Tomlinson and Bud Clark are a heck of a 1-2 duo. And so I like those guys on the end. Abe Kamara, I can't believe I haven't said his name yet, is an outstanding corner. He's not going to pick off any passes. He might not even break up passes. But if someone catches the ball, he will be there to hit them. He has provided some of the best hits on defense for TCU this year. So there's a lot of talent in that back end, and I'm confident enough that the defense can adjust, make the necessary plays to keep TCU in the game. So yeah, I think the back five is the strongest aspect of the defense.
Interesting. So I'm not sure how much WVU football you've watched this year, but our offense outside of the Texas Tech game has been pretty solid. It's been kind of night and day compared to last season. We have a good tandem of running backs, which unfortunately coming into this game has went from a trio to potentially a one-man show.
One guy,
but yeah, we have two really good receivers in Bryce Ford Wheaton and Caden Prather's really come on strong. So, kind of looking at this matchup, do you feel like WVU is going to be able to move the ball or potentially even keep up in the scoring race against TCU?
Yeah, I think especially with the, I don't want to say best players, but JT Daniels is certainly a good quarterback. And Bryce Ford Wheaton scares me every time I see his name on the roster. There's certainly opportunities for West Virginia to make big plays against this defense. Like I said, I like our back five, but they are prone to giving up one or two plays where you're like, man, like someone really should have been there to cover that. So, yeah, I would expect Bryce to have a long touchdown. I would expect Caden Prather to get involved.